Alright, so your place does not have Ethernet throughout it, but you want wired Ethernet performance. You want a wired connection. But rewiring your old house is pretty expensive. What can you do? Well, you can MoCA Bridge. That's something like take these adapters that has coaxial in one side, pull out Ethernet another side, go through a coaxial cable like you see here, and pop Ethernet out the other side. These devices are cool. These are Actiontecs. I think Sunbeam now bought them out, but these are expensive. Another option, if you're more cost sensitive, is using an old Verizon router, like one of these. Here's the interesting thing about these old Verizon routers, is that they're cheap. You can find them online for dirt cheap. 2, they support MoCA bridging. 3, they have a built-in gigabit switch. Almost every scenario where I want to deploy one of these, I actually want to get a switch next to it. So one of the locations I'm going to deploy these is going to have a switch. So in this scenario, you get it all at once. Now, what's the downside? The downside is if you look up the specification for one of these, you'll want one of the newest ones or the last one they make. I called it a Verizon router, but they are made by the same people that make these. They're actually made by Actiontec. So it's the same technology. Actually, you see the name here. If you could see this, let's get it. There we go. Actiontec, same name. Actiontec, same company. Same company makes these. So same technology in neither of these, except for the newer ones are just faster. So these can do 2.5 gigabits over the coaxial. These can do 270 megabits over the coaxial. 270 megabits sounds slow, but with low latency and not having to deal with retransmitted packets as much, 200 megabits could have multiple people in your house doing 4K Netflix streaming. On average, HD content is around 15 megabits per second, sometimes as high as 20, 25 for a not so well compressed stream. So let's call it 20. So 4 people watching 4K Netflix is about 80 megabits per second. Most video games are sub 10 megabits per second. You're caring more about your latency, your ping. So this will help solve that problem. So almost all scenarios, this guy does it. And you can find these on eBay for cheap. So we're going to run through a couple scenarios. We're going to run through point to point. And we're also going to run through what happens when you put a splitter in here and you connect another device in. So you have 3 devices on your MoCA network. What's worth knowing is once you convert this to coaxial, you're going from data to analog. And with analog, you can send multiple signals over the same medium. And so there's a lot of different signaling specifications, single sideband, quadrature amplitude modulation. Quadrature amplitude modulation, by the way, is the same technique that's used to send multiple signals over a fiber channel. It's also used in wireless communications. And so what's cool about that is you can have multiple devices sharing the same line, and they will use these techniques in order to be able to send them without colliding and causing the signals to have high noise ratio and become undetectable by the receivers. So you can actually have many devices. I have to double check what the exact number is, but you can have many of these devices running on the same coaxial line. You could have one sitting right next to your main router, and then a number of other ones spread out through the house. So in my case, I need 3, so I'm going to leverage these 2 plus the Actiontec. After the Verizon Actiontec. After buying this, I started to consider, did it make sense? Should I have just bought 2 more of these online and saved a ton of money and have 3 of these with up to 200 megabit out to the router? For the most cases, I actually think this is the route to go. The scenario where you don't want to do it, sample scenario for me is where I use a gigabit in my home network is when I'm editing videos. So if my office wasn't next to my equipment where I could get an easy LAN connection, I would leverage this MoCA approach so that I could get gigabit back downstairs. But in my case, I have all of that connected, so I just want low latency, decent speed. Hundreds of megabits is fine. So, I definitely think I overspent here, but either way, we're gonna walk through it, see how it works. I usually like to show the instruction documentation. So this is what the document shows for doing the MoCA adapter connection. Notice that it talks about using the splitter, so it also works with the TV as well. Alright, so I got the initial setup going. I've got an Ethernet cable plugged in directly from a switch that has the inbound network connectivity. It's powered on. Oh, and I was just about to say that it wasn't working, that I had power and the coax light wasn't doing anything. And as soon as I started this video, I now have coax light coming over to the second device. And now I have internet flowing out of the second device into a laptop on the other end of the connection, and I have network connectivity. And I just did a speed test and I was getting full gigabit. I mean, it was doing it at 11 milliseconds. Alright, so the next setup is going to be trying to bring this in place. The only downside, other than speed, that I could see to using one of these is this out of the box. I just plugged it in. It just worked. There's nothing to do. These you have to configure appropriately for the MoCA bridging to work. So that is what I'm going to do next. Alright, so we're on to testing scenario number 2. So this time we're connecting the MoCA adapter, one of the new ones, the fast ones, with the older Verizon Actiontec router. So that is this Actiontec device. This Ethernet cable is coming in from my main internet switch, so this has live internet. My coax cable into the Actiontec router. From the Actiontec router, we're going out, and from there we are headed directly into a laptop where we can check connectivity. So the first thing I have to say about this setup is I was anticipating that it would work, but I was anticipating that setting up this Actiontec to do it was going to be fairly difficult. It wasn't difficult at all. Putting it into bridging mode was surprisingly easy. My third link I found was the correct one. I went to Actiontec's website. It has a really confusing post about how there's no such thing as bridge mode, and I don't know why people are asking about bridge modes for these. But there's definitely a bridge mode for this, even though you might come across that confusing support page from Actiontec. What they really mean when they say there's no bridge mode is that this is not a modem. And sure, it's not a modem, but we don't need it to be a modem. We just need it to be a simple MoCA bridge. We needed to turn this coax information into Ethernet information. And what's actually interesting is if you look at the top of this device here, you'll see WAN coax, and then you'll also see LAN coax. So if you see right now, LAN coax is the one that's lit up. That's the one you need to do MoCA bridging in your house. WAN coax is what would happen is if you had Verizon sending the ONT into here. And so that would be actually the equivalent of being the white port for you. Right? So on a switch, on a router, you have your WAN port over here. So this is the port that sort of outbound, you're outside of your NAT, outside of your firewall. And then you have another LAN port where it's just a switch, essentially. And so you can turn this coax into either one. So you can MoCA bridge for WAN or you can MoCA bridge for LAN. And setting it up to MoCA bridge for LAN is pretty easy. Also, in my case, I'm going to be using my own wireless access points and everything, so turn off these antennas. All quite straightforward. I'm going to show you where they are in the menus, but I'm really going to link to the blog. It has a little bit more detail than I'm going to spend, but the simple point here is not bad. I also did a speed test, so we can walk through that and you'll see how that performs. When I had the two Actiontec, and the other side is, just like when this was talking device to device, you'll see that the coax light is blinking. The device that is not working, being used right now, you'll notice there is no coax light blinking. Right? You'll notice that as long as the LAN coax light is blinking on here and the coax light blinking on here, it's all working. As I said earlier in the video, you can find these old Verizon routers ranging from $10 to $30. So they are not that cheap. So they are pretty cheap. And depending on what you're trying to do, what your use case is, I think for most people, they're actually the right choice. So what did I get? I got 160 megabits out the network, and I got about a gigabit on the new devices. But where I'm installing all of these devices, 100 megabits with low latency is perfectly fine. 150 megabits with low latency is perfectly fine. One thing I will say is when I read the specification sheet, it claimed you could do 270 megabits with the old Verizon Actiontec router. Maybe I need to double check my exact serial version. Maybe I don't have quite the newest version or sort of the last version they released. So if you're buying one of these, you'll want to double check the SKUs. I'll put some notes in the description that identifies the different SKUs and which one you'll want to steer towards. Some of these are really old, so they only have like 100 megabit switch, for example, where this has a gigabit switch in the back. So you'll want to pay attention to that kind of stuff. So the last scenario to really showcase the analog way that this works for coaxial is I'm going to put a splitter in here. And I'm going to talk from either side of the splitter. And I'm going to allow all three of these devices to be MoCA bridged. Alright, all done. So let's see what I've got here. So I've got, as I've mentioned before, inbound network cable into this device. Then we've got the splitter. From the splitter, we've got one Actiontec device and the old Verizon Actiontec device. One thing that I've noticed is you can see here that the LAN coax light is lit. You can see here that the coax light is lit, and you can see here that the coax light is lit. As you'd expect, when I took it all apart, I had everything still powered on. All the coax lights for the two devices, is at the last time I had it set up with just one of the small boxes in the Actiontec router. Both coax lights went out. I pulled out some extra coax cables, plugged it all into the splitter, plugged it into each of the devices, and the coax lights lit up on all three devices. Ran speed test from one client device and ran it from another, and everything worked. I was able to just get internet as quickly as I plugged in and out of each port. So it picked it up immediately, DHCP hooked back up, no problem. One thing I did notice is for the Verizon Actiontec router, my speed rate went down, so I went down to 120 megabit from the consistent 160 that I was at before this setup. The two Actiontec devices, when I picked the client device for the MoCA bridge small device, I got the same full data rate over 850 megabits. I didn't see it drop below that. In my testing, it bounced between 850 and 950, and it didn't matter whether or not I had the extra splitter in place or not. So I'm not sure if the Verizon Actiontec router is running into some issues there. If it's able to do over 100 megabits per second and 10 milliseconds or less for a close data center for your speed test, I think that's pretty reasonable. And given the price difference, I think it's enough to go with the older technology for this. So that's the end of the video. I walked through setting up these coaxial devices. They are super easy. It's easy whether or not you buy the 2.5 gigabit Actiontec Sunbeam product. It's easy even if you buy one of those old used Verizon Actiontec routers. For most use cases, I recommend going with the Verizon Actiontec routers because you'll probably, where you install one of these, have a high likelihood where you're going to want a switch anyways, so you get a gigabit switch for free. Do recognize that if you're trying to do some really high data rate stuff, so 400 megabits per second, then you probably will run into some issues. That aside, it does seem to work. Now, all of my quick tests for the sake of this video was with really short coaxial cables. This isn't with longer runs throughout the house. So once I do my final setup, using these devices to allow me to get my wireless access point set up in the other areas of the home, if I experience something different, for example, if I put this in the furthest bedroom away and I run my speed test wired, and if I put this on the second floor and run my speed test wired, and I'm getting wildly different results, then I might make another video kind of talking about what that experience was with the wireless access points and MoCA bridging. Otherwise, you can assume it worked out pretty well. Or you can ask in the description below and I'll let you know how it turned out.